Amelie always believed her life in Makira was blessed. She had a husband, Sifo, who she thought loved her, and together they shared a home filled with laughter and family moments. She trusted him with her whole heart, never imagining that one night would change everything she knew about love. It was raining heavily after a family gathering when they drove back home. The roads were slippery, the sky dark, and Amelie could feel her husband's impatience as he sped through the wet streets. Suddenly, a truck appeared out of nowhere, headlights flashing. The screech of brakes filled the air before the car crashed, spinning violently and hitting the roadside. Glass shattered, metal twisted, and Amelie's body slammed against the seat. Pain shot through her like fire, and warm blood began to run down her face and arms. She turned to Sifo with tears in her eyes. "Please, help me," she whispered, her voice weak and trembling. She expected him to reach out, to comfort her, to call for help. But instead of love in his eyes, she saw something that froze her heart: coldness, almost irritation. Amelie's world felt like it was falling apart, not just because of the accident, but because of the man sitting next to her. The rain poured harder, mixing with her blood on the ground, while her husband stared at her as if she was a burden. In that painful moment, she realized this accident was not just breaking her body, it was breaking the life she thought she had. Amelie could not believe what was happening. Blood was dripping from her forehead, her body was trapped between the broken door and the seat, and every breath felt like a knife cutting through her chest. She stretched her hand toward Sifo, her husband, the man she thought would fight for her no matter what. Her voice trembled as she begged, "Please, Sifo, don't leave me. I need you." But instead of reaching for her, Sifo stepped back. His shoes splashed in the muddy water as he looked at her with eyes that carried no love. His words cut deeper than her wounds. "I can't waste my life on a cripple," he muttered, almost spitting the words out as if she was nothing to him. Amelie's heart broke in that instant. She wanted to scream, to tell him that she had given him her life, her trust, her loyalty. But her voice was weak, drowned by the sound of the rain hitting the broken car. She watched in shock as he turned his back and walked away, leaving her bleeding in the darkness. The tail lights of his figure grew smaller until they disappeared completely. That was the moment she realized. She was not only fighting for her life, she was fighting against the betrayal of the man she loved. The rain poured harder, soaking her clothes, washing the blood across the ground. She shivered, not only from the cold but from the fear of being alone. Every second felt like an hour, and every beat of her heart felt like it could be the last. She whispered broken prayers, hoping someone, anyone, would find her. Hours passed. Her eyes grew heavy, her body weak, but somewhere deep inside, her spirit refused to give up. Just when darkness threatened to take her, she heard faint voices in the distance. A group of villagers, carrying lanterns, noticed the wreck. They rushed toward her, gasping at the sight. "She's alive! Hurry!" one of them shouted. Gentle hands lifted her from the wreckage, careful not to hurt her further. Their warmth felt like hope. These strangers cared more for her life than the man who had promised to protect her. Amelie's tears mixed with the rain as they carried her to safety. She was barely conscious, but her heart cried louder than her broken body. "The man I loved left me to die." That night, as the villagers worked to save her, one truth burned into her soul. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from enemies but from the very person you thought would never leave your side. The villagers carried Amelie through the muddy roads until they reached a small clinic in Kasiri. The building was old, the walls cracked, and the smell of medicine mixed with damp air. It was not a big hospital with shining machines, but it was her only chance to survive. The nurses rushed to clean her wounds, their hands moving quickly as they tried to stop the bleeding. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind replaying the last words of her husband, words that cut deeper than her injuries. When she finally opened her eyes the next morning, she felt pain everywhere. Her ribs ached, her legs were bruised, and her face carried fresh stitches. The room was quiet, except for the sound of rain still falling outside. A weak light entered through the broken window, and Amelie realized she was alone. No husband, no family, no one waiting by her bedside, just her and the pain. For a moment, despair threatened to swallow her. She thought about giving up, about closing her eyes and never waking again. But then something inside her whispered, no. You will not die like this. She remembered the villagers who saved her, strangers who cared more than the man who vowed to love her. If they believed she was worth saving, how could she throw away her own life? The days that followed were slow and full of suffering. Every time the nurse changed her bandages, Amelie bit her lips to stop herself from crying out. At night, the pain in her chest kept her awake, but she forced herself to breathe, telling herself that every breath was proof that she was still alive. When she looked in the small mirror beside her bed, she saw scars forming, but instead of breaking her spirit, they reminded her that she had survived the unthinkable. Money was another battle. She had nothing in her pocket, no savings to pay for her treatment. But the clinic staff, touched by her courage, allowed her to stay. Sometimes she helped them by folding sheets or cleaning the floor even while recovering. It was her way of saying thank you and also her way of reminding herself that she was still useful, still capable. Weeks turned into months, and Amelie slowly learned how to walk again. Every step was painful, but every step also filled her with strength. She was no longer the fragile woman who begged for her husband's help. She was now a fighter, shaping herself from brokenness into something unshakable. Lying in that small clinic bed one night, Amelie whispered to herself, "Saipho left me to die, but I will live. I will rise. I will not let his betrayal be the end of my story." And with that promise, her heart began to burn with a new fire, one that would carry her beyond her pain and into a life she never imagined. When Amelie finally grew strong enough to leave the clinic, she had no idea where to go. She had no home in Kasiri, no money, and no family waiting for her. The thought of stepping out into the world alone terrified her. That was when Mama Thandi, an elderly nurse with kind eyes and a warm smile, noticed her struggle. Mama Thandi had cared for Amelie since the first night she was brought in, watching her fight death with quiet strength. One evening, as Amelie sat outside the clinic staring at the dusty road, Mama Thandi placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said, "My child, you cannot go back to the life that hurt you. But you can start a new one. Come stay with me." Amelie's eyes filled with tears. Nobody had spoken to her with such care since her father passed away years ago. She followed Mama Thandi to her small but welcoming home. It wasn't grand, just a two-room house with a small kitchen garden, but it was full of warmth. For the first time since the accident, Amelie felt safe. Days passed, and Mama Thandi began to teach her little by little. She showed Amelie how to stitch torn clothes, how to use old fabric to make something new, and how to turn simple material into beautiful dresses. At first, Amelie's stitches were uneven, her fingers shaky, but Mama Thandi encouraged her. "Every stitch tells a story," she would say, "and your story, my child, will be one of strength." Amelie began sewing clothes for neighbors, and soon word spread in the community about the young woman who could turn old fabric into something stylish and unique. She poured her heart into every design, as if she was sewing her pain into the threads. People noticed. They didn't just see clothes. They saw the passion, the beauty born out of suffering. Customers began to call her the woman who stitched her pain into beauty. With Mama Thandi's guidance, Amelie also learned how to manage money. She saved every small coin she earned, keeping her dreams alive even on the hardest days. The local market became her new battlefield, and her tiny stall was her place of victory. She greeted customers with a gentle smile, and her story slowly spread. Women whispered to one another, "Do you see that girl? She was left for dead, but look at her now." Each sale was more than just income. It was proof that she was alive, proof that she had risen. Mama Thandi often sat beside her at the market, proudly watching as Amelie's stall became one of the busiest corners of the street. And every night, when Amelie closed her eyes, she silently thanked God for sending her a stranger who became family. She had once been abandoned on the roadside, bleeding and alone. Now, under the wings of Mama Thandi, she was finding not just survival, but purpose. And deep in her heart, Amelie knew, this was only the beginning of her new life. Amelie's little stall in the Kasiri market became her training ground, but her dreams were much bigger than that. Every coin she earned, she placed carefully into a small tin box that she kept under her bed at Mama Thandi's house. Sometimes it was just a few coins, sometimes a little more, but she never spent carelessly. "One day," she whispered to herself each night, "these coins will build my future." She didn't stop at just sewing. Whenever there was a free workshop in town about small businesses, marketing or design, Amelie made sure she attended. She sat in the back of the room with her notebook, writing down every detail. She didn't have the polished clothes or fancy education others had, but she had something stronger: determination. People at the workshops began to notice the quiet young woman who always asked sharp questions and stayed behind to learn more. Years of sacrifice finally began to show results. With her savings and a small loan, Amelie opened her very first boutique in Lusaka town. The shop was modest at first, with only a few mannequins and racks, but her designs spoke for themselves. She created dresses that blended modern style with African tradition, each piece carrying the heart of her journey. Customers who had once bought from her stall in the market now proudly traveled to Lusaka just to purchase from her boutique. Word spread quickly. Tourists began to hear about the young designer with a story as powerful as her clothes. Fashion show organizers invited her to display her work. Investors saw her potential and offered contracts. Soon, her designs were not only in small towns but also in luxury hotels, displayed for wealthy guests from around the world. Amelie could hardly believe it. The same hands that once trembled in pain were now creating masterpieces worn on stages and admired by many. But no matter how far she climbed, Amelie never forgot where she started. She kept Mama Thandi close by her side, making her the manager of her first boutique. She also gave jobs to women who had once struggled like her, teaching them tailoring and helping them earn their own income. Her business was not just about fashion, it was about giving others the chance to rise just as she had. Yet, even with all the success, Amelie carried one memory in her heart like a scar: the night she was left bleeding by the man she loved. That memory fueled her. Every stitch, every design, every new contract was built on the fire of that betrayal. She told herself, "I will never again be the woman who begged for help and was abandoned. I am the woman who builds, who rises, who owns her future." And brick by brick, stitch by stitch, Amelie turned her pain into an empire. The girl who was once broken on the roadside was now a powerful businesswoman, admired and respected across the region. Years later, Amelie returned to Makira, but she was no longer the broken woman who once lay bleeding on its streets. She came back not as a victim, but as a name people now admired and whispered about with respect: Amelie Zuri, the successful businesswoman who turned her scars into a crown. She stepped out of her luxury car in front of one of the new hotels she owned, her elegant dress flowing, her head held high. Everywhere she went, people stopped to look at her. Some gasped, some smiled, and others whispered, "That's her, the woman who lost everything and came back owning everything." Her story had already spread far beyond Kasiri and Lusaka. Newspapers carried her face on their front pages with headlines like, "Amelie Zuri, the woman who turned scars into success." Fashion magazines praised her designs, business journals wrote about her empire, and investors across Africa wanted to work with her. From boutiques in major cities to hotels and tourist destinations, Amelie had built a life so grand that even she sometimes had to pause to believe it was real. But the return to Makira was more than just business. For Amelie, it was personal. Every street corner carried a memory of her younger self, walking hand in hand with Saifo, attending family gatherings, laughing without knowing what pain awaited her. Now she walked the same streets with confidence, her cars following, her staff carrying her bags, her presence undeniable. Meanwhile, Saifo's life had taken the opposite path. After abandoning Amelie, he spent his days chasing quick money, careless pleasures, and false promises. He gambled away his savings, wasted his opportunities, and pushed away everyone who once cared for him. Friends grew tired of his arrogance and left him behind. Over time, Saifo found himself living in poverty, struggling to find even the simplest jobs. He had nothing, no family, no wealth, no respect. When news spread that Amelie was back in Makira, owning estates, hotels, and boutiques, it reached Saifo like a knife to his chest. At first, he laughed bitterly, telling himself it couldn't be true. But soon he saw her name in the newspapers, heard it on the radio, and finally witnessed the crowds gathering around her cars in the city center. The woman he had left bleeding by the roadside had risen higher than he could ever imagine. Saipho stood among the crowd one evening, hiding at the back as people cheered her name. He could barely recognize her. The fragile wife he had abandoned was now a queen in her own right. Every coin she had, every hotel she owned, was a reminder of the night he walked away. And as Makira celebrated the return of its daughter, Saipho silently tasted the bitter truth. He had lost not just a wife, but the chance to stand beside a woman who had turned pain into power. Saipho's life had crumbled into dust. Once he walked through Makira with pride, a man who believed he was above everyone else. Now he wandered the streets with torn shoes and empty pockets, begging for odd jobs just to fill his stomach. Hunger and shame became his daily companions. Nobody respected him anymore. The friends who once drank with him had disappeared. The family members he once ignored turned their backs. He was truly alone. One morning, he heard about job openings at a new luxury apartment complex in the city. Desperate, he decided to try his luck. The work wasn't glamorous, just cleaning floors, fixing broken bulbs, and keeping the compound neat, but Saipho was willing to take anything. He couldn't afford pride anymore. With shaky hands, he joined the line of men waiting to apply. As the crowd moved forward, Saipho glanced at the large golden letters above the entrance. His breath caught in his throat. Written on the board was a name he knew too well, Amelie Zuri Properties. His knees nearly gave way. He blinked, hoping it was a mistake, but the letters stood firm, bold and shining. The owner of this luxury apartment complex, the person who would decide his future, was none other than the woman he had abandoned to die on a rainy night years ago. The wife he left bleeding on the roadside now owned buildings he was begging to work in. Saipho's heart raced as he stood in line. Memories came rushing back. The crash, Amelie's weak voice calling for help, his own cruel words before he walked away. For years he had pushed those memories aside, convincing himself it was the right choice. But now, standing under her name, the guilt he had buried came back with crushing force. Next, the security guard called, motioning Saipho forward. He stepped into the cool lobby, his eyes wide as he took in the marble floors, shining chandeliers, and expensive furniture. This was not just wealth, it was power, and all of it belonged to Amelie. As he filled out the job application form, his hands trembled so badly that the pen slipped. He could hardly write his name. The thought of facing her made his stomach twist, yet he knew he had no choice. Without this job he would starve. The staff informed him that all applicants would meet the owner for final approval. The words hit him like thunder. He swallowed hard, sweat dripping down his face. Soon, he would stand before the woman whose trust he had destroyed, the woman who had risen higher than he could ever reach. For the first time in years, Saipho felt true fear, not of hunger, not of poverty, but of Amelie. She was no longer the broken wife he abandoned. She was the powerful businesswoman who now held his fate in her hands. The hall went quiet the moment Amelie stepped inside. Her presence filled the room before she even spoke. She wore an elegant dress, her head held high, every step echoing against the polished floor. The staff straightened, the applicants froze, and all eyes turned toward her. She was a vision of power, nothing like the fragile woman who once begged for help on a rainy roadside. Saipho's heart nearly stopped. His jaw dropped as he stared at her, unable to believe what his eyes were seeing. The Amelie he remembered was weak, broken, and helpless. But the woman standing before him was strong, graceful, and commanding. Shame washed over him like fire. He lowered his head, his lips trembling, and when he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "Amelie, please listen to me," he stammered. "I didn't mean to. I was scared, I was foolish. Please just give me one more chance. I'll do anything. I only need a job." His words spilled out like water, desperate and messy. The other applicants shifted uncomfortably, whispering among themselves, realizing who he was. They knew now that this was not just a job interview, it was a moment of reckoning. Amelie looked at him without flinching. Her eyes, calm yet piercing, held the weight of her past. She let the silence stretch, letting Saipho's desperation hang in the air for everyone to see. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and sharp, carrying across the room like a blade. You left me bleeding on the road, she said slowly, each word sinking into him. You walked away while I begged for my life. And now, you stand before me asking for bread. The hall went completely still. Sipho's knees weakened. He wanted to disappear, to hide from the eyes staring at him, but he couldn't. The truth was out. He had abandoned her, and now his survival depended on the same woman. Amelie, please, he whispered, dropping to his knees. I was a fool. See it now. I should have never left you that night. Have nothing, Amelie. Nothing. You are my only hope. Amelie's gaze softened for a moment, but only for a moment. Her scars were hidden beneath her elegant dress, yet they burned in her memory. She had cried enough tears in her life. She would not cry for him again. She took a deep breath, then turned to her staff. Continue the interviews, she said calmly, as if Sipho's begging was nothing but background noise. But the weight of her words still lingered in the air, cutting through him deeper than any wound. Sipho stayed on the floor, his voice shaking, but Amelie had already turned away. In that moment, everyone in the hall understood the power of her journey. The man who left her to die now knelt at her feet, and the woman who was once broken now stood untouchable. The room was heavy with tension. Everyone could feel it, the kind of silence that made hearts pound and breaths catch. All eyes were on Amelie and Sipho. People whispered, wondering what she would do. Would she yell, slap him, humiliate him in front of everyone? Would she finally take revenge for the years of pain, the betrayal, and the scars she had carried? Amelie stood tall, her dress flowing elegantly, hiding the scars that told the story of her survival. She looked at Sipho kneeling before her, his face pale and eyes full of fear. The man who had abandoned her, who had watched her suffer and thought she was nothing, was now completely at her mercy. She let the silence stretch a little longer, letting him feel the weight of his mistakes, letting the crowd feel the full power of her presence. Finally she spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, and clear, but every word carried the fire of the woman she had become. I don't take revenge, she said. Sipho blinked, disbelief washing over him. I could humiliate you. I could make sure everyone remembers how you left me to die. I could destroy you completely. She paused, letting that sink in. The crowd shivered. Some leaned forward, waiting for the storm. But I don't, she continued, her gaze unwavering. Instead, you will work under me. Every floor you sweep, every room you clean, every coin you earn will remind you of the woman you thought would never rise. The woman you left bleeding on the roadside is now in control of your fate. Sipho's lips trembled. He wanted to cry, to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. The reality of his position, kneeling before a woman he had destroyed, hit him harder than any hunger or poverty he had suffered. He looked at her, searching for a trace of the girl he once loved, but all he saw was strength, power, and the quiet justice of a life rebuilt. The crowd, silent until now, began murmuring. People realized this wasn't just a punishment, it was a lesson. Amelie wasn't cruel, but she was firm. She had taken control of her story and now made sure that those who had wronged her could witness her rise, not through destruction, but through power, dignity, and mercy. Sipho slowly nodded, swallowing hard. He could barely lift his head. I understand, he whispered. His voice was small, broken. Amelie straightened, turning her gaze to the room once more. Let this be a lesson, she said softly but clearly, that no betrayal can stop a determined heart. You left me thinking I would fall. But look at me now. The crowd erupted into quiet applause, some wiping tears from their eyes. Amelie had shown them all something bigger than revenge. She had shown the power of rising from betrayal, the beauty of mercy, and the strength of owning Gon's life completely. Sipho's hands shook as he signed the contract, the paper trembling under his fingers. Each signature felt heavier than the last, a silent reminder of every choice he had made that led him to this moment. The man who once walked away from Amelie, leaving her bleeding and broken, was now sweeping floors, polishing windows, and cleaning rooms in the buildings she owned. Every task, every coin he earned, was a quiet echo of the life he had lost. Amelie watched calmly, her scars hidden beneath her elegant dress, her heart steady and strong. She didn't gloat, she didn't mock him. She simply stood tall, knowing that she had already won. She had survived, rebuilt her life from nothing, and turned her pain into power. The empire she had built, hotels, boutiques, estates, was a testament to her determination, resilience, and courage. The woman who was once left helpless on a rainy road now held everything Saipho had ever dreamed of, and more. Word of her return and triumph spread like wildfire across Makira and beyond. People whispered her name in awe: Amelie Zuri, the woman who had stitched her pain into success, who had refused to let betrayal define her. Women across Africa looked to her story for hope, strength, and inspiration. They saw that no matter how deep the wounds, it was possible to rise higher than anyone could imagine. Amelie's life had transformed completely, but she never forgot the struggles, the heartbreak, or the lessons she had learned along the way. She had turned every scar into a story, every failure into a stepping stone, and every betrayal into fuel for her fire. She didn't just survive, she owned everything, and in doing so, she became a symbol of strength, courage, and unstoppable resilience. Her journey was a message to the world: no one has the power to decide your ending except you.